An analysis of the Navy 2025 shipbuilding plan. So pretty much every year, the Navy submits a plan to Congress. This is what we need. This is what we want. This is how we're going to get there. This is what we want the fleet to look like. And it's projecting out into the future. What they have, what do they got to decommission, and what would they like? In summary, and I'm sure it's no surprise, the Navy wants to grow their fleet. Of course, we have a massive Pacific Ocean that we need to control. And to do that, you're going to need a lot of ships. The platforms do seem to be changing rather than aircraft carriers and attack submarines. It seems that the Navy is pivoting to different platforms, such as unmanned vehicles are also included in here. Now, it's not very specific on what kind of unmanned vehicles, what the models, makes, or look like. However, they are budgeting for that. So we will start seeing that in the near future. Now, the Navy submits their package every year to the CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office. They both run the numbers on it. Navy comes up with one number, CBO comes up with another number, and they see kind of, hey, does this meet eye to eye? They're a little bit different. Almost every year, the number is a little bit different depending on how they're calculating carrying costs and what they're actually putting on the budget, whether it's a long-term, short-term, etc. This budget for the Navy, Plan 2025, and growing the fleet, is roughly $40.1 billion. Now, that includes $35.8 for new shipbuilding construction, according to the CBO. The Navy plan differs from the alternatives of 2024 plan in several ways. Most notably, it would have the Navy's buy fewer next-generation attack submarines and large surface combatants and more current generation ships. Nonetheless, in real terms, and that's adjusted for removing effects of inflation, the costs of the 2025 plan are substantially higher than those of the alternatives of the 2024 plan, because unit costs would be higher for most all major shipbuilding programs, and because the current plan calls for purchasing a few more ships. Now, you got to think about lag time. You order a ship this year, it's not going to be available for another 6, 9, 12 years. Some of these aircraft carriers take way longer than that. The plan is to expand the fleet to 390 battle force ships. Now, right now, the number is at currently 296 aircraft carriers, submarines, surface combatants, amphibious ships, combat logistics ships, and other support ships. To achieve the goal of 381 battle force ships, the Navy would buy 364 ships over the next 30 years, 293 combat ships, and 71 combat logistic and support ships. If the Navy adheres to this schedule for retiring ships, it would have a fleet of over 300 ships by early 2030. In 2054, the fleet would be around 390 ships. And that's a little bit more than the Navy's goal, or kind of right on the nose. Now, of course, projecting out this far with so many unknowns, with budget, supply chains, actual shipbuilding output, disasters on ships, early retirement for ships, carrying costs, other maintenance issues, you're kind of projecting into the unknown. Hence, they are shooting for a number around 390. Now, the Navy submitted this package to CBO, and for construction costs of $35.8 billion per year over the next 30 years, that's anywhere between 7 and 16% higher than CBO's estimates for the 3 alternative packages that were submitted in 2024 plan. Sounds like they went a little bit light for the 2024 plan. Now, some of the factors for the growth of this cost and the difference between the Navy's plan and the CBO's estimates attributes to both the increase in the estimated costs of many shipbuilding programs and due to the large number of ships that the Navy would purchase under the plan compared to what it would have purchased under 2024 plan. The estimate costs risen over the several reasons, but these are the most significant. Some ships have taken longer and been more difficult to build than Navy anticipated. Of course, we've seen that time and time again. New weapon systems come up, changes in plans, etc. The ships designed have proven more complicated to complete. Great new ship, looks good on paper, looks good in the models. Now you're actually in the dry dock trying to build this thing out. Much more complicated. The estimated costs of some ships were unrealistically low in early shipbuilding plans. And we've seen this time and time again, which leads to the terrible headlines of cost overages. In order to get Congress to bite down on some of these plans and move forward with them, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, all branches of government will put a number lower than inspected. And once you're already halfway, 3/4 away through building a ship, unexpected costs are going to come up you're not going to not pay to have the ship completed. So average total shipbuilding cost over the next 34 years would be 46% more than the average appropriations over the past 5 years. So we're seeing this very large ramp up of renewing our fleet, getting more ships out into the fleets to better prepare for what potentially is coming with an altercation with Eastern powers of China. Here's something of interest. The combat power of the fleet would actually decline before it increases. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the Navy's 2025 plan would reduce the number of ships that can fire missiles or torpedoes. However, these capabilities would grow along with the fleet, although not by as much as they would have under the alternative plans of 2024. To take full advantage of that capacity, the Navy would also need to build up its inventory of munitions. So here's a serious problem. A bottleneck of building a larger fleet. The industrial base would need to further increase to help support ship construction. Over the past decade, the amount of tonnage under construction at the nation's shipyards increased by 80%. Under the 2025 plan, the amount of naval tonnage that the Navy wants to buy would increase further. Although demand would be greater for some types of ships than others, aircraft carrier construction would remain fairly steady, but the tonnage of submarines, surface combatants, amphibious warships under construction from 2030 to 2054 would be 50% higher on average than it is today. And I think part of the reason that the aircraft carrier tonnage would remain steady is the delay time. They just kind of always keep one in the dry dock being built at all times, because I think it's about a 10 to 12 year delay for each one coming through. Ballistic missile submarines, the plan of the new Columbia class ballistic submarines, which are slated to replace the Ohio class submarines as they retire, is the same as it was under the 2024 plan. This is where things start to get interesting. The Navy set a goal of adding 134 unmanned vessels to the fleet, but the 2025 plan does not include any estimated cost for them. In its 2023 shipbuilding plan, the Navy discussed the potential of unmanned systems to contribute to its overall capabilities. Specifically, it mentions the possibility of using medium unmanned surface vessels as sensor platforms, large unmanned surface vessels as adjudicate missile magazine teams with larger manned multi-mission platforms, that's a mouthful, and extra large unmanned undersea vessels to deliver multiple payloads to extend ranges. Those unmanned vessels are all much larger than a single-use expendable drone used, for instance, in the war in Ukraine that we're seeing right now. Because the unmanned surface and undersea vessels are still being developed and their technology success is not completely assured, the future quantities of vessels and costs associated with them have not yet been determined. The Navy still has not announced how many MUSVs it would purchase other than the first prototypes, and it's not clear whether the service would purchase those vessels using its shipbuilding account or some other account. It has purchased unmanned undersea vehicles using its accounts for other procurements instead of its shipbuilding account. And we had a video not too long ago kind of showing the vulnerabilities of these very large vessels, especially operating in tight spaces like the Suez Canal. Another vessel ran right into an aircraft carrier. As we're seeing the development of unmanned aircraft, drones, undersea weapons as well that are unmanned, this could be the future, and this could be the cost-saving implementation that the Navy needs. 390 vessels might not be the best move. Now, they are moving forward with that. However, hypersonic missiles, other drones, UAVs could leave a very large platform very, very vulnerable to a low-cost weapon system relative to a multi-billion-dollar floating airport. Now, something to think about when we're talking about capacity to build is, who are we comparing ourselves to? Well, as of right now, the biggest threat appears to be China. Leaked intelligence by Business Insider reportedly shows that China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times greater than the United States, a far cry from America's oceanic dominance in the past years. Why is the Navy having trouble building ships? Well, obviously, labor is always going to be an issue, constantly changing plans, agreeing veterans retiring. So if you go to shipyards, if you worked in one like I have, there is a lot of retired Navy When we had more people in the Navy before, they would retire, they would work in shipyards. Now they're working in the shipyards for 15 or 20 years, then they retire. We're starting to come to the end of that large life cycle. And of course, we have a Madrid of other issues, supply chain issues, and the likes. This is one of the issues of hollowing out your industrial base in your country. Shipping everything overseas to make your bottom line look better, make your earnings per share look better, make your gross domestic product better. At what cost? Is America just a spreadsheet? Is America just earnings per share? How fast can we grow the economy? Is that what it's really all about? Well, this is one of the issues that you're going to face when you hollow out your industrial base, especially one as important as shipbuilding. Yes, you can build container ships cheaper in other countries. Well, of course you can. There's a reason that China has a shipbuilding capacity 232 times larger than ours. One, they have literally millions and millions and millions of unemployed men that they can put into shipyards that are essentially property of the CCP. They really don't have a choice. They've been assigned a job very cheaply. Their cost to manufacture is so much cheaper than ours. But over the years, we have slowly shut down all the secondary and tertiary suppliers in the United States to ship them overseas, mainly China, to have cheaper supply chains. And then we moved away from doing storage and backlog supplies, and now we're at an on-demand supply. So that way you don't have to have a bunch of carrying costs on your shelves in your warehouse. So you really only have a few types of these bolts, and you really only have a few types of these wires, and you really only have a few types of these screens, and you really only have so many rolled sheets of steel. This is becoming very, very obvious as an issue, and people have been screaming about this for a long time. But as this machine of Wall Street capitalism and everything is about the shareholders' value, that's what people like to hide behind. It's all about the share. Well, if I don't, I'm legally obligated to increase shareholder value. Well, the shareholders of this country have a serious issue with this. And now we're facing an issue of we cannot project our global dominance, which is the most important thing that we have to project. It is us as the reserve currency. Look, without a Navy, it ain't going to happen. Without a Navy, who's going to really adhere to our threats, essentially? We've had several instances that I can remember of world leaders saying they're going to use a different currency. Gaddafi comes to mind. Didn't work out so well for him. We have the ability to do that, whether you think it's right or wrong, because the U.S. Navy. We could park off the shore. We could run guns to rebels. We could do a lot of other things very quickly, being a dominant power in the ocean. Not a lot of other countries have that access to do those things. They don't have that pleasure. Final thoughts. The Navy has a huge problem on their hands, or as some would like to say, an opportunity. And that's really what it could turn out to be. Could turn out to be a massive opportunity. Drone warfare on the sea, unmanned ships, aircraft. We have a plan we're moving forward with. 2024, 2025, 2026, we're going to continue to submit to build these ships, trying to build capacity, pushing these ships out to the fleet. However, in the very near future, that could all change. Perhaps dynamics shift in the Pacific. Perhaps China starts having more problems than we thought they would have. Of course, there is a quality issue with their ships, but there's quality issues with our ships as well. There's training issues. Both sides have these problems. One of the greatest strengths that the U.S. military has had in the Great World Wars is that obviously we were a little bit at an arm's length with the Atlantic Ocean. It gave us some breathing room to kind of sit back, feel out the situation, see what needed to be done. We had a massive pool to pull from as far as manpower goes, so that's awesome. We have great resources. But really, it was just our ability to outproduce. We could outlast our enemies while they were expending their resources. We were just starting to develop and really open them up. And this dynamic with China, although they outman us and could outproduce us for a short amount of time, they face serious issues with energy. And that's one thing that we have that they don't. They import almost 85, 90% of their hydrocarbons. So they wouldn't be able to, much like Japan in World War II, would not be able to sustain a prolonged war. Now they would, though, if they control the sea lanes. And again, that's what brings this back to the Navy controlling the sea lanes and why it's so important. Of course, we have Taiwan. Everyone's talking about Taiwan with the semiconductors. We're trying to move that onshore. Just like with building an aircraft carrier, huge lag time. There's also Singapore, which, if you look at the population of Singapore, I believe it's about 30 to 40% ethnic Chinese heritage. Whether that's an issue or not, that's yet to be seen. But the straits there, very important to them. Again, that's most of their hydrocarbons come through there. They get a lot of coal from Australia. We'll see which way that goes if a conflict emerges. Of course, now they're closer than ever with Russia, which has tons of natural gas and fuel to send them by pipeline too. Makes it much easier. They're much more insulated that way. Like we do have a counterbalance. India on the land with massive amounts of people. They're having border disputes right now in the Himalayas. If a conflict ever broke out, would they join us? Would they be able to break out of the mountains across the Tibetan plain to really force an issue with China and the manpower that they have? These are all questions that are interesting to think about, and really only time will tell.